Damn. Kinda hoping. Okay, as I was saying, if you're new here, which I don't think too many people are, but you never know. People do come in every so often. We read papers, we explain them, and at the end we get to review them if they were any good. You know? People have their opinions. DCI says the show is about two boys who are in their late 20s, Mark Cargan and Jeremy Osborne. The two meet at a fictional Dartmouth University and live together as roommates. Okay. 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. Okay. I think you can, I'll link you a place you can watch it free after stream. 8.7 out of 10 on IMDb. Okay. Cool. Maybe, just like you send me a message on, the Discords. So, yeah. But anyway, yeah, this is Infinity and Metaphysics by Daniel Nolan. And this is actually in the Rutledge Companion to Metaphysics. So this is a book chapter. It's a short one at that. So we're going to find out. And as always, please, ask questions. I will try to explain the best I can. Thankfully, Ivan Neo, if he's still in chat, he's a physics PhD. So we have a physicist here. Okay, so this is Infinity and Metaphysics. Yeah, so this is from a few years back, like 2009. So this shouldn't really have changed anything, like, because both physics and philosophy do not move at speeds that would have done anything in the last 14 years. Okay. Do space and time have limits, or do they go on infinitely? Are there smallest units of space or time, or smallest divisions of objects, or can they be divided into infinitely many pieces? How are we to understand the infinities we find in mathematics? Metaphysicians since the ancient Greeks have been fascinated by these questions and by others about infinity. Let's begin by considering a relatively familiar mathematical infinity. The counting numbers 1, 2, 3, ... go on infinitely. Whenever you have such a number, you can always add 1. There is no greatest counting number, so the sequence has no end. When we consider the integers -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, we can see that this is a sequence that has no greatest member and also no least member. For any integer, no matter how, you can always subtract 1 and get another integer. It is a sequence that is infinite in both directions. There are some unusual features of these infinite series. One is that a part of the series can be at the same size as the whole. Consider the sequence of even counting numbers 2, 4, 6, and the series of all the counting numbers 1, 2, 3. The first intuitively has only half the numbers of the second. On the other hand, they can be paired off one by one with each other. This is also true of the counting numbers, say the prime numbers. There are as many prime numbers as counting numbers. We can even assign a different counting number to each of the integers without leaving any out if we order the integers in the right way. To illustrate, so these are the counting numbers up here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The even numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Primes 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. Integers 0, -1, 1, -2, 2, -3, 3. Unreal says, dude taught at Syracuse just before I was there. I wasn't taking any metaphysics courses though. Yeah. So yeah, you can see that, like, the whole point of this little demonstration here is that even though the numbers look like you get more in the counting numbers or in the integers because they go both down and up, that you can, like, sort of block them up off vertically. And so you can always say, hey, look, if you just start with this and you keep going, you will be able to cover all the numbers eventually in all of them. But I mean, not cover all of them, but you will be able to go on infinitely in the same manner in all of them, and you will there will always be this sort of blocking off. You can always have the same sort of block where each counting, even, primes, and integers will have, one member per block. Do we know for sure there are infinite primes? I believe we have proved that at this point. Author has clearly not stated the proof here. I believe there are infinite number of primes at this point. Okay. So, infinite collections can be split into non-overlapping infinite sub-collections. For example, dividing the counting numbers into the odd and even numbers. The whole does not necessarily have more members than a part. Found it? Yeah, I suspect it is that at this point. I mean, to tell you the truth, I'm pretty sure there's even an infinite number of, like, Mersenne primes. Yeah, oh, it's freaking Euclid, yeah. Like, this is one of these things that, it's been known. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing I was thinking of was that they proved Mersenne primes, which are two prime numbers that are two apart. So like, yeah, 3 and 5 or whatever. Here's you looking at you, kid. You, kid. Okay. The results are curious, but it is easy to get used to them. Arithmetical infinities are not the only kind of mathematical infinity. In Euclidean geometry, lines as opposed to line segments go on in each direction without end, as do planes. Lines can be divided into line segments of greater and greater lengths without end. Indeed, there can be 2 divisions of line, each adding up to an infinite length, which do not overlap. As well as these sorts of infinities in the numbers and in geometry, we are used to infinities in the small. Just as counting numbers can get larger and larger without end, so can fractions get smaller and smaller without end. Just as no largest counting number n, there is no smallest fraction 1 over n. Yeah, because you can always add, 1 more to n, so it's just a little bit closer. Between any 2 fractions, there is another halfway between them, and there are infinitely many fractions between 0 and 1. But what about infinities in the physical world? Even if mathematical infinities of these familiar sorts are well behaved, should we think the physical world can have those structures? Should we think that real space and time go on infinitely? I mean, like pausing here for a sec, I think not. I think the world is, to reduce it to a mathematical infinity as we understand it today is premature. I think that would be unlikely. Do I know? Of course not. Do I know it's not like the end of the universe? If there's even like that even makes sense to call it the end of the universe, if it's like infinitely big, there is no end. Who knows? Is it relative, so there is no middle and no end because it's all relative to where you are? Something like that, but that's getting a little bit more complicated. But again, I don't think it'll be easy to just like reduce the physical reality to a mathematical one. It just seems like who knows what is going on in physical reality. It would seem to require us to be outside of our physical reality to say this is the way physical reality is according to some mathematics, and then if we're outside of that reality, then we're already saying something very strange. But yeah, I feel like I should do my little you guys, here's looking at you, kid. Where's it? Where? Let's see.
You're winning, sir. Oh, thank you very much.
There we go. Got my Casablanca clip there. Okay, space and time. The first issue of Infinity about space and time that occurs to many is the issue about whether space and time extend infinitely. That's what I was saying. The consensus these days seems to be that this is an issue for cosmologists more than philosophers, though some philosophers still object to the idea that the past even could be infinite. This is connected to the issue of an infinite regress of causes discussed in the final section. Yeah, this goes back to Aristotle. Like, where did the universe start? Well, it had to start somewhere, or else it just kind of is a weird thing. Like, there is no beginning to the universe. It's like that's why Aristotle said things like an unmoved mover started the universe. Like, it doesn't quite like have a beginning. Okay, author says, of more philosophical interest is the question of whether space and time are infinitely divided, whether there are smaller and smaller regions or durations ad infinitum. This issue has been a traditional source of paradox. Yeah, nowadays we have the Planck length that limits how small we can get, but I'm sure the author knows. So Zeno of Elea is famous for a number of paradoxes about space and time, several of which use the infinite divisibility of space and time. Oh, I wanted to mention something. You can't, and this was on something Ivan was talking about earlier. Ivan was saying that what paradoxes do for us mean they're telling you there's something wrong with your overall view of the world. And that you should might have to revise something in your web of knowledge. For the most part, I agree. That doesn't mean that the universe is not just paradoxical. Assuming that we understand all things in the universe at the moment is something we can't do. So maybe there's shit in the universe we just don't understand, and it is in some sense paradoxical. So I can't even rule out that the universe is consistent in the way our logic currently works. I don't rule that out, because the universe is big and I am dumb. Like, very simply. So the idea that I can even rule out that paradoxes inherently say there's something wrong with my knowledge, I can't do that. I can say that usually that's the case, but maybe sometimes that is just how the universe might be. So I don't even go so far as to say that contradictions and paradoxes are telling me that I'm wrong. I I can only say I am probably wrong, and maybe the universe just is that way. So, and I'm not the only, like, I'm not like a very, like, there's people out there that just say paradoxes exist in the world. They're called dialethists. I might be a very, very, very weak one. Like, I'm more agnostic than full-on dialethist that say that's the way the world is. But then again, I don't like being agnostic on this topic because that sort of defaults to the conservative worldview. And so I actually would lean slightly away from saying that, like, this is why I say I'm a very weak dialethist, because I don't want to just fall down on the conservative old viewpoint, which I have no reason to believe, actually, at this point. I kind of reject the idea that I know that the world is consistent. How would I know that? It's just been most of my experience, but a lot of things I've experienced are not really, well explained. And the idea that I could explain them is hubris on my part. I don't know if I can explain all this stuff. Unreal Brian says, paradoxes are problems with logic, not the universe, right? See, that's the thing. I don't know. Maybe. And that's generally the position, Unreal. That's generally people are saying, we don't know what we're explaining, or we've got something wrong in our understanding. But see, that's saying it's something wrong with us and not the universe. Maybe the universe is that way in some very rare cases. It would be highly unusual, but that doesn't mean it isn't. And if you are going to be very honest, not honest, but if you're going to be very careful about what you're making claims about the universe, then, like, I'm trying to be very careful about the claims of knowledge I have. I can't guarantee that I know the universe, that paradoxes are always and only problems of our logic. Maybe that's the way the universe is sometimes, and it's not a problem of our logic. Maybe that just is how the universe is, and our logic is accurately describing that part of the world. But again, I'm a severe anti-realist about most things. So it's like, I'm not even going to claim that I know how the scope of paradox to be part of our logic. I know a joke that incorporates both the themes of Jeopardy and Infinite Weight. What is your mom? Oh dear God. What is your mom? Of Infinite Weight? Who knows? Okay, but yeah, I wanted to bring that up because this was getting mentioned in Ivan's stream, and I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for my stream. I was like, I could argue with this, but I mean, I don't really, I didn't have time before to do it, so. But I could bring up, like, gotta be careful. Even making claims about paradoxes, you don't always know where they end. Alright, so Zeno of Elia, Unreal says, are there any paradoxes, paradoxes is fine, that apply across all logic? Seems like those would be candidates that might be real if there are any such. Who knows? That's the thing. People like to say sometimes the liar paradox, like that what I'm saying right now is false, or I'm lying to you right now. Like, that usually, like, paradox of self-reference, I mean, I know ways around them. There are lots of ways around them. Not everyone is, most people are unhappy with, most people have their preferred ways to get rid of logical, just like straight up logical paradoxes of self-reference. I have my own preferred way. I'm working on a paper on that right now. That doesn't mean, like, they're good. Everything has problems. And so the idea that, like, there's some universal paradox and then there's some universal way of dealing with it, that's not how philosophy works. You don't get, like, this one answer unless you're working in a very limited system, like a very, one little system where you can get answers. That's not how it happens. It's a long-term discussion. And so, the liar paradox is basically mentioned in the Old Testament. No, in the New Testament. Like, it's literally in, like, the Bible, like the New Testament. Like, these things get mentioned. So these things have been around for thousands of years. The original formulation, which is not exactly accurate, are all Cretans are liars, and the person who was saying it was from Crete. So, and you can actually hear this. We use the word Cretan to be idiot. And I think Shane actually brought this up on stream once, because the people who knew the people on Crete, they had such, like, weird views on stuff that they used the word being from Crete as a term of idiocy. And so Cretan became idiots. Yeah, all Cretans are liars. Exactly, semiotics. Yep. So, yeah, all those from Crete are called Cretan. Well, I mean, that's what it was back in the day. That's where the word comes from. I don't know if they are still called Cretans, but, like, that's what it was. But, like, that's where the word comes from. I mean, a lot of words they have these like not so pleasant things. Like we try not to insult each other nowadays. We try, but like it's like Franks and knaves or something. Like being frank just meant you were French, because the French thought they were good, and so being frank meant you were being honest and good. And the knaves were like this non-French people that lived a little bit farther away from them, and they were called knaves. And it's like, well, now why'd knaves be called knaves? That is a bad thing. Well, it's because the French didn't like them, and the French were the dominant culture. So, yep. Creatine is different, though. Yeah, well. But you can eat creatine. This is Sparta! Those dumb cretins. Well, that was the thing. The Spartans were assholes, so they thought everyone was stupid except for them. And that's not true either. So, yeah. So, like, this is what, like I've said before, I take a very long view on a lot of these things. And so even if, like, the opinions other people have sound, like, very, like, normal, natural, reasonable, all those, like, good terms, it's like I don't get to have, like, easy views quite often. So, yeah. Spartans are the best. MSU, the universe. Okay. Metaphysics. And, I don't know if anyone was in Prof. Lara's stream last night, but he was saying stuff about, like, determinism. I disagree with that, too. Yeah. San Dimas High School football rules! Exactly. But, I mean, like, that's the thing. It's, like, going across times and histories. Explain, yeah. So, it's like, what can you actually do? But see, that's the genius of that movie. You're going across times and history, you're taking historical figures and putting them in like like the late 80s or whatever, 90s, California, and like these guys are getting along and like they getting themselves in all sorts of trouble. It's like, yes, the world wasn't the same back then. And it's like, and do the concepts line up? It's like, who knows? That is definitely Bill and Ted. Yeah. So, Unreal says, actually, and this is absolutely true, I went to high school in Sparta, Michigan, so I was a Spartan before Michigan State. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, this is why people use these terms, because it's like a thing to be feared, the Spartans. Because, like, the history of their scary warriors has lasted for this long. I mean, some of it, of course, is mythology, but this is why people use this stuff. Like, we've got eagles all over the U.S. Because, eagles are scary predators, and it's like the thing. It irks me the amount of U.S. places that steal place names from elsewhere. Well, we're a country inhabited by a lot of immigrants, so when they settle the place, it becomes new. Like, I'm in New York because they were calling it like Old York or regular York in Britain, and so this is New York because people are uncreative. But I mean, Manhattan is from Mannahatta, which is what the indigenous people called it at the time. So if you're from Manhattan, you are from Mannahatta. But I mean, that makes sense. But you're in New York because, the British took over. But what else? Like, there's 1 million Palestinians in the U.S. I mean, but again, people, like, these are people that want to make their promised land. That's what they were doing. So they call it Palestine. Yeah. You can have Manhattan. Yeah. Well, yeah. That's fair. But I mean, my hometown is called Dobbs Ferry. There was a guy named Dobbs. He had a ferry. That's why it's called Dobbs Ferry. Yeah. Bring back New Amsterdam. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, again, that's just Amsterdam, and they called it new because people are uncreative and they just want to call it like, hey, we were from that place and now we're here. Whatever. There's a lot of, there are like native names that have that are still around, but I suspect you don't hear about them as much because you hear about the Palestine and the Syracuse, all these things, because like those are places that people settled. The ones that didn't get settled as early are then those have the more traditional names. So like yeah, I can't even think of anything. Like, yeah, like Quahog. Like, why is something called Quahog? I don't think you have a Quahog in Europe. Detroit from the Strait in French. Oh, yeah, see? This is the sort of thing. But like, yeah, I mean, yeah, what's a Quahog is in like Rhode Island or whatever. Let's see. Like, what are some other good names around here? Like, oh, I don't know. It doesn't matter. What do we got? You're minding your business in literally any cotton 1700s. Hey, yeah, okay, there you go. And then here comes England. We're going to take over. Yeah. In the suburbs, we have Troy. Yeah, there's a Troy here, too. So, it's like, yeah. What are you going to do? People are uncreative. And that's why everyone has the same fucking names. And people will get made fun of for having unique names. And it's like, well, maybe people should have better new names. My name's Noah. It's an ancient name. Like, from the fucking flood. And we're still talking about space and time. So Zeno of Ilia is famous for a number of paradoxes about space and time, several of which use the infinite divisibility of space and time. Exactly what Zeno's arguments were and what they were intended to achieve remains a matter of controversy, so we'll choose versions with more of an eye on illuminating issues of infinity than historical accuracy. You know, I think I've read a paper, and I also had this feeling when I was in school. I wrote a paper on this, that if you actually understand, for the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, that they prioritized space over time, it actually makes a lot more sense what he's saying. And we don't do that. We have space-time, so they're kind of equal, or we actually prioritize a lot of our history since the Greeks has prioritized time as fundamental. And so it's like, I think that's part of the problem. If you prioritize space, Zeno makes, I think, good sense. And there is a paper out there that claims this. I mean, DC just stands for District of Columbia. Like, yeah, I like in D.C. there's a neighborhood called Tacoma in Washington, D.C., not Tacoma in Washington State, but really, how did this happen? Yeah, exactly. Like, people have the same names. Oh, when I was up in Boston, everything is called Harvard. I used to live on Harvard Street, which ran into Harvard Ave. No. I was at the corner of Harvard Street, Harvard Ave, and Harvard Place, and the Harvard Street turned into Harvard Ave down the block. So it was Harvard Ave, Harvard Street, and Harvard Place all in one corner. And my parents came up to visit me once, and they said, it should be really easy to find. Our hotel's on Lexington. I said, oh, God, really? That's terrible. And they wouldn't listen to me. I said, no, you have to get, like, a better address than Lexington. They're like, no, Lexington's going to be a big a big street. We'll find it. I'm like, no, every little town has a Lexington in it. And it's like, they went to the wrong town. It's like, yeah, Harvard or Harvard. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm not from Boston. Harvard. Yeah. It weirded you out when you're in Oregon and they have a Saginaw and a Detroit Falls. Yeah, and what's it called? Oh, like there's Washington University in St. Louis. It's like, and then there's like a St. Louis University in Washington. Like, it doesn't, yeah. Lake Oswego too, yeah. Yeah, and there's a Oswego upstate. Maybe that's the same place. I don't know. Upstate New York has an Oswego. The state university there. So I had friends that went to Oswego. Ivan says, saw a stand-up comic pretending to be a Boston cop, giving directions no matter what you ask him. He says, straight ahead. Yeah. A tiny podunk town south of Pittsburgh called Washington. Yeah. You can, there's a funny map, basically, that you can look up all the places that have other names in the United States, and it's everywhere. And that was kind of the joke in The Simpsons, too. That's why they named it Springfield, because there's a million Springfields all over the country, so that made it a city that could be in a town that could be in any state in the country, because everyone has a Springfield. There's a Pleasantville, right near in Westchester, not that far from Dobbs Ferry, and yeah, there's like a Pleasantville in New York, and so there's Pleasantville all over the country too, and that was like sort of the joke in that movie that like Pleasantville could have been anywhere. Springfield named after Springfield, Essex. Yeah. It's from, the old English stuffs. Yeah, so. Okay, so like I was saying, I think we can fix Zeno's paradoxes so they're not as confused. But, that's, again, side to the point. So, yeah. Perhaps Zeno's most famous paradox is of Achilles and the tortoise. Swift Achilles and the very slow tortoise agree to have a race, and the tortoise is given a head start. Let us suppose the track is 100 meters long, and the tortoise has a 10-meter head start, and let us suppose Achilles travels 10 times faster than the tortoise. By the time Achilles has reached the tortoise's starting point, the tortoise has moved up to a new point, call it point 1. By the time Achilles has reached point 1, the tortoise has advanced again to a new point 2, and so on. No matter how many times Achilles reaches one of these points, he has not yet caught up to the tortoise. He could only catch the tortoise it seems, if he could reach the end of his infinite series, but the infinite series has no end. So Achilles can never catch up with the tortoise. Yeah, so this was, I think Ivan was talking just exactly about this earlier, with the, infinitely small things going to zero, but they didn't have infinitely smalls back in the day. O'Brien says Zeno had a lot of potential, but he never really got anywhere. But obviously, the above reasoning has gone wrong somewhere. Fast runners can catch tortoises even when the tortoise has a head start. We can even calculate when Achilles will catch the tortoise if we know their speeds. For example, if Achilles is traveling at 10 meters per second and the tortoise at 1 meter per second, Achilles will catch up with the tortoise after 1.11 repeating seconds. So what went wrong with the reasoning in the previous paragraph? That was his Achilles tortoise? God. Okay. Zeno himself may have wanted to use the paradox to show that motion was an illusion, which would provide one solution to the puzzle. We could try denying that there is infinite sequence of points, P1, P2, P3, and so on, and so deny a crucial assumption in Zeno's argument. But the most popular solution to the puzzle is to allow that, after all, Achilles can pass through the infinitely many points, Pn, in a finite time. Does that mean that we have to postulate an infinite series with a start and a finish? Something I imagine Zeno would claim is a contradiction in terms. A series with first and last members seems finite. In one sense, yes, and in another sense, no. Since the infinity of points are all found in a line in a finite segment of space, we must be able to find a point after all of those points. The point where Achilles is adjacent to the tortoise comes after every point where he has not yet caught the tortoise up. In that sense, the space where all the Pn, all the points are found, has an end. On the other hand, we do not need a last Pn. That series of points will have no last member. It is just that as the time goes towards 1.1111 repeating seconds, the PNS, the last point will get closer and closer. So the Pn series has no last member. Because the P sub n, the Pn is right here. I don't know if you can see, it says PNS. So the last point up to the the point past it, that's the PNS, the penis, okay? And that's where you have to get to. Yeah, exactly. The guy knew what he was doing at that point. So because he could have put you could have put like PTS for like the time points. So yeah. But yes, philosophers try to be funny. I usually warn them against it. It's usually not worth it, but they try. So, another paradox of motion attributed to Zeno concerns the impossibility of an object starting motion in the first place. Let me call this the paradox of the arrow, though names for this paradox vary. Consider an arrow fired at a target. Before it reaches the target, it must reach halfway. Before that, it must reach a quarter of the way. And before that, an eighth, a 16th, etc. Before the arrow can even get halfway to where it needs to go, it needs to travel through an infinite number of points. But that argument did not require us to focus on the target or on arrows. Anything that moves at all to another place would first have to make it to halfway, and before that a quarter. Any mover has to complete infinitely many motions before it can get anywhere. So Zeno concludes, motion is impossible. One interesting thing about this second paradox is that it concerns an infinite series of points with a clear end, reaching the target for example, but no beginning. No matter how far back we go towards the arrow start, there are still midpoints it must reach before it can get any further. There is no first one of these points the arrow can reach. To have moved any distance, the arrow must already have passed through many points, infinitely many in fact. This matches the mathematical structure of the number line. There is no first fraction after zero. For example, pick any rational number to be the first and we can always find another one closer to zero by halving it. The application to physical space strikes some people as more troubling. How can an arrow start moving without there being a first place it moves to? But at least on the orthodox conception of space being made up of points as positive distances from each other, there is no such first place. Yeah. So this is the thing. This is why Zeno's paradoxes have lasted so long. If you are not just assuming modern integral calculus or whatever, they just seem very, very strange. You can't do shit because of Zeno's argument. God, I'm sorry. It's like, this is why it lasts. And if you somehow are not thinking in terms that the world actually is the way calculus says it is, then you may still have a problem. I mean, space is quantized. Unreal. There, like, it's the Planck length. You can look it up from Max Planck. And you can look this up. So that's the smallest length we can have in space as far as we know at the moment. So according to, I think, current quantum physics, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but that's the bottom of it. So like I'm sure there's a Wikipedia on this that's better at me explaining it. Let's, just for not being a ridiculous person, take a look real fast just to show you that Planck units. Okay, that's what the yeah, again, you have to do a lot of abstraction and stuff, but let's see. Yeah, see, these units are a system of natural use because they're definitions based upon properties of nature, blah blah blah, properties of free space, properties of space. And the term Planck scale refers to quantity of space, and so there is a Planck length, which you can see right here, and it's 10 to the minus 35 meters, and that's the smallest we can technically go, I think, and it's fundamental according to our current theories. But yeah, I would correct us if I've said something silly, please. So Ivan says, yes, if we extrapolate from quantum physics, that is the case, but those lengths correspond to the highest energies, so if physics breaks down at those distances, energies. Yeah, so maybe the right thing to say is there is a minimum length, but basically that's where everything starts to fail that we understand. Ironic that the smallest units are named after a guy called Max. I mean, this is one of those things where I don't care what his name is. He was so damn good at the physics, and like we've got a bunch of things named after him, like, yeah, I guess it's ironic, but I just want to give Max Planck a lot of credit for all this stuff. Although, did I remember correctly that some shitty things came out about him, so we have to cancel him? I forget. I don't care. Like, it's just very impressive at the moment. I don't have time to care right now. We can look that up later. Yeah, if we want to find out if we need to cancel Max Planck. Okay. A third paradox of Zeno's, which I will call the paradox of plurality, raises an interesting question about what space is like if it has infinitely many parts. Max headroom, yeah. So, well, I won't show max headroom, but that's cool too. Zeno invites us to consider what size the smallest parts are. If there are some positive finite size, then we add infinitely many of them together, we will get an infinite magnitude. But if they are all of zero size, as points are often conceived of as being, then even adding together infinitely many of them will still give us zero. The first horn of the dilemma may not strike someone particularly worrying. Maybe space is infinite in size. Ivan says, if you've seen the film Einstein and Eddington, they say he was involved in creating chemical weapons in World War I. That wasn't what I was thinking about. One of the great physicists of like the 20th century, turns out he was like fucking a lot of like his students, and so it was kind of like really scummy. And I was like, well, were they consenting adults at the time? And it turned out there was just kind of scummy. That's what I was thinking of. But I don't want to accuse Max Planck of that because I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was one of the other big names, but yeah, chemical weapons is shitty too. Making, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's saintly by early 20th century standards. Yeah, this is the thing. They were taking someone's name off, like, the physics building. I remember making headlines. Yeah, it wasn't, like, what happened was, it wasn't like it was, like, it wasn't great even back then. They knew it was bad, even back then, what, like, I'm saying, about, like, the way they were treating their students, but I don't remember who that was. In making chemical weapons again, by that time period, it might not be that bad. So I don't want to like be shitting on people unnecessarily. But I was like saying, I like Max Planck. He's got these worth like remembering, but who knows? The problem, okay, continuing. So, is space infinite in size? The problem that makes it so uncomfortable is that the ordinary view of space has infinitely many points, even in a finite region, such as the distance an arrow traverses to hit its target. Even if space as a whole is infinitely large, we do not want to say that the space on a typical archery range is infinitely large. Notice the same problem arises for time. Time seems divisible into smaller and smaller intervals, so what we are saying what are we to say about the smallest intervals, if any? Perhaps this could motivate us to reject infinitely many parts of space after all. Indeed, some people believe that space is granular and only finitely many smallest pieces of space can be found in a space of finite magnitude. Another slightly subtler response is to say that space has infinitely many parts, but no smallest parts. Regions get smaller and smaller ad infinitum, just as we can find smaller and smaller distances from zero along the number line, but there are no zero-length points underneath. Or perhaps space has only a potential infinity of small parts. It can be divided smaller and smaller, but there are not already smaller and smaller regions corresponding to such divisions. Each of these alternatives to infinitely many zero magnitude points will be discussed further below. There is another answer available to someone who wants to maintain the orthodoxy of a space of points without positive finite size. This relies on the kind of infinity of points postulated in contemporary theories of space. According to standard theories of space, space is a continuum. It is dense, between any 2 points there is another, and complete, in a no-gaps sense, which has a variety of technical characterizations. Space has a structure like that of the real numbers, rather than that of just the rationals. There are lengths of root 2 meters and pi meters, as well as lengths expressible as ratios of integers. Yeah, so that means there's weird numbers that go on forever, and space is always going to take up that. Surprisingly, while the rational numbers and the real numbers are both infinite, there are strictly more real numbers than rational numbers. The real numbers cannot be put in a one-to-one correspondence with the rational numbers. There are, in fact, many sizes of infinity in mathematics, infinitely many, in fact. The size corresponds to the real numbers. The size corresponding to the real numbers is often known as continuum many, while the size associated with the rationals, which is the size the same as for the counting numbers, is known as countably many. Yeah, so the continuum is much bigger than the countable. So, yeah. Viper says Feynman was a Lothario. Einstein offered a marriage to both a mother and her daughter. Gajusek was a pedo. Curie had an affair. Well, an affair. Who cares about that? Schrodinger had a wife and a mistress. Again, like that. Again, is not great. Pauly loved drugs, alcohol, prostitutes, and porn. Yeah, what's a Lothario? I don't know that term. But, yeah, Einstein, there were some shitty things that came out about him, and then some more stuff came out that actually made it less bad. It's like he was a bad dad. Name came to suggest, okay, seducer of women. Okay. Lothario is a seducer of women. Yeah, Einstein, like, so what if he liked both the mom and the daughter, especially if they're both of age? For a while, they thought he was a shitty dad, and then it turned out that some people were holding on to like Einstein's letters and correspondence with his son that they said they would hold on to for Einstein X years after he died. And so it didn't come out to, like, you know, he died in whatever, the 50s or whatever. I forget when. And so, like, maybe it was 60 years after his death. So it only came out actually in like the 2000s. So it's like, you know, maybe he was a shitty dad, and then it turns out no, he was actually more involved in his son's life than he realized. What happened here? There we go. Yeah. Seems your husband is quite the philandendron. P.I. Harry Crumb. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't mind people sleeping around, really. Like, so what? Like, that's, in, like, even, like, contemporary terms, not a crazy thing. It's shitty if, like, you're cheating on your wife. I'm not saying, like, it's a good thing, but people having, like, especially, like, everyone doing it, it's like, okay. But, yeah. It's like, it's not good to cheat on your spouse, but there are much, much, much worse things. Like, some guy was a pedo. Yeah, don't do that. Like, that's bad. So, like I said, there are worse things out there. And I mean, the history of philosophy is like, Like the philosophers cannot be criticizing the physicists. I don't think like there's like the pot calling the kettle black. It's like, yeah. So that's just how the history goes. Okay. Surprisingly, while the rational numbers and the real numbers are both infinite, there are strictly more real numbers. Oh, did I read this? Yeah, countably many. Yeah, so the same as the counting numbers, there's countably many, and then the real numbers is like continuum. That's way better. Well, way more. My old undergraduate advisor had a fun story of like his wife, actually, before he married her when she was in grad school, slept with JFK. Which is kind of funny. They were both at a conference at a hotel, and she ended up sleeping with, I think he was just Senator John F. Kennedy at the time, but so she ended up sleeping with JFK. So that's a nice story. Like, everyone was happy about that one. Like, no one had problems there. Okay, when adding the sizes of finitely many non-overlapping regions together, the obvious thing to do is to assume the resulting larger region has the size which is the sum of the sizes of the smaller regions. A straightforward extension of this procedure covers adding countably many sizes together, and indeed, on the standard picture, the metric, on space is countably additive. But it is less straightforward to extend this to the case of adding continuum many regions. It cannot be done as limits of longer and longer finite sequences of addition, for example. When we want to know the size of a region made up of continuum many distinct smaller regions, we cannot add the smaller sizes. Instead, the size of the large region is specified by a measure on the smaller regions, not by addition. Adolf Grunbaum famously pointed out that this gives contemporaries another kind of response to Zeno's paradox of plurality. Zeno claimed that if we put together a lot of things of size 0, the resulting size will be 0. But if we take a measure of a set of continuum many size 0 points, the measure need not be 0. We can agree with Zeno that additions of 0, even countably infinite additions, always give 0, and nevertheless hold that that a space made up of enough size 0 points is not itself size 0. You see, now we're using some funky math to say, hey, even if you add lots of zeros together, you get something not 0. That seems very strange, but again, math. This is what the math is. Who knows? Like, so if the universe is like this weird math, then it's okay. But it gets harder to understand at that point. The mathematical tools to make this distinction were not properly clarified until the 20th century, so it is no surprise that Zeno did not consider this response. Suppose Zeno objected that this was mere mathematical trickery. Yeah, limits, exactly. So that didn't happen until a few hundred years ago, and then we've got this other thing till mid-20th century. Yeah. So yeah, you can go blame Leibniz and Newton. We're still getting positive magnitude from putting together things of 0 magnitude, even if the putting together is not addition. Yeah, so again, you're combining in some way things that are of 0 size and then not getting a 0. How is this any improvement? Yeah, so this was my complaint. Like, maybe this makes no fucking sense. I don't know math, though. In response, we could say that the intuition that putting together zeros gives you 0 is an intuition we have about addition, and we have conceded addition does work this way. There are coherent models of measurement theory that show us another way of putting together. Of course, that by itself would not show that we can put together spatial points and get non-zero size spatial regions, but it does tend to undercut Zeno's argument that we could not get regions of non-zero finite size if we started from points. You know, the fact that we do things differently now doesn't really undercut Zeno. It just means that maybe we're stupid now and Zeno was right. It does seem that, like, okay, this group of mathematicians say we can do it, but it does not cohere with, like, our experience. And maybe they're not talking about reality at that point. So, like, if Zeno's talking about our experience and they are talking about something else, maybe they're just talking across each other and, you know, what they say doesn't matter. They're going to say we are talking about real things, and that's what I guess this Grunbaum claimed. It's that, you know, Adolf Grunbaum said, look, you know, we have ways of combining things. Maybe this is how reality is. Now, do we know that? No. But, you know, it might be acceptable to some. And that makes, the fact that it's acceptable to some might make a difference. Maybe. Okay, a host of contemporary puzzles about the infinite divisibility of space and time and what possibilities there are if actual infinities of objects are possible have flowered in the second half of the 20th century. These puzzles often go under the heading of New Zeno. They include Thomson's Lamp, from, you can see it in Salmon, Hilbert's Hotel. Yeah, Hilbert's Hotel, I think someone was mentioning the hotel stuff earlier. Was that DCI? Yeah. And many fascinating scenarios introduced by Jose Bernadette. Some have thought these raised new problems for the actual infinite, but many have just drawn the conclusion that actual infinities can be used to generate surprising thought experiments. Mothman, lamp. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the Mothman is a good thing. Like, Mothman. I think I have a Mothman emote somewhere. Here we go. Oh, I have a moth and a Mothman. So I have a Mothman hype and a moth. There we go. Alternatives to continuous space and time. I think I have when I was looking at this many years ago, I have a very weird argument denying the absolute continuity of space and time. So yeah. Adam Fighter, what's up? How you doing? We're reading something about infinity and metaphysics and talking about how can we have like infinite like space and Zeno's paradoxes in contemporary terms. Like how do we understand space and time where we can slice it up infinitely, and then don't we just run into like old style paradoxes? I mean, granted, now we have limits and mathematical things that are different than they had 2,000 years ago, but still, it's like hard questions to answer. He just took a break from it. I'm sorry. Well, this is more not mathematically rigorous. We're just discussing it philosophically here. Okay, so alternatives to continuous space and time. There are a number of alternatives to the view that space and time are made up of infinitely many points. You could believe that space and time are granular, and that there are minimum lengths and durations. If there are minimum lengths and times, the arguments of Zeno's given do not get off the ground. There is no guarantee that there will be any halfway points for the arrow to pass through, for example. Consider an arrow that is only 3 spatial minima away from its target. Well, so like if there's pieces, it can't be in one of the non-other pieces, so it can't break that up. Yeah. You just take a backseat and it might help to stay motivated? Yeah. Okay, consider an arrow that is only, so while the tortoise will have moved from some place that it was when Achilles reaches him, there will be no guarantee that the tortoise will have moved on from all of them. Yeah, so like if the tortoise can only go so many spaces and so many times, then eventually Achilles will have caught up to him because the tortoise will not have moved off that same spot. So you can think of this as like, a video game where there's squares you can move to. And so eventually you catch up because, there's only 3 spots you could go. And if you can do 3 spots in one turn and they can't move in that turn, you can catch up to them. Sorry, I was watching someone play XCOM recently. So that's how I'm thinking about this. All right. If Achilles moved 10 minima away every time the tortoise moves, for example, if Achilles starts off 5 minima behind the tortoise, will have not moved when Achilles comes up level. Yeah. Fun fact, you believe the original story was not a tortoise race. I forget what it was. It might have been, I think there was some sort of tortoise thing. Might not have been a race, but it was something. The author quoted it here. I think that's what it was, because I think there was something, but there was a bunch of Zeno paradoxes, so not all of them were. Okay, minima, spaces, and times do bring with them puzzles of their own, however. Are speeds restricted to certain values, n minima of spaces per m minima of time? Yeah, so you can imagine in a video game you can only move X amount of blocks per turn. Like, is reality like that you can only move X blocks per turn? Like, that'd be very strange if, like, there was a reality thing where there was a certain number of, like, blocks you can move in space per time, and that was, like, a setting of the universe. Okay. If someone moves 2 spatial minima per minimum time, do they jump? Yeah, and so can you only, you just go ahead? You can't be in between those spots. After all, there is no instant of time for them to be in the middle space minimum. Yeah, so you can't be, if everything's a square, you can't be in between squares by the end of your turn. Shapes are also puzzling without continuous space. In standard geometry, the ratio of the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle to the sides is often irrational. For example, when a right-angled triangle has two sides of 1 meter, the hypotenuse will be square root of square root 2 meters. But in a discrete space, it is hard to see how to get distances like square root 2 meters. Indeed, if we model discrete triangles by drawing a grid and represent distances by the number of adjacent squares different squares are apart, then we get odd results if we draw a right-angled triangle with short sides, for example of 5 squares long. If we allow squares that touch at a vertex to be adjacent, then the hypotenuse is 5 squares long. Let's make Agni play infinitely divisible chess. Yeah, exactly. And you know there's like weird things where they do stuff like that, where you've got like chess in like little chess boxes. Like they have sort of like fractal chess. I've seen like weird things. Hey, Kali! Kali, what's going on? I have Kali listed here. Let's give Kali a proper shout out, though Kali is a linguistics streamer. And Kali just got back from vacation, so she's streaming again. Hooray! She streams Sundays. You didn't come here for angles? Well, we're doing infinity and metaphysics. I'm sorry. We can go back to some philosophy of language later. I also do philosophy of language. But, like, yeah. Everyone go drop Kali a follow. And, yeah. So, like, I go hang out there sometimes on Sundays. But, like, this is what I do here. Like, welcome in. I talk philosophy. And this was suggested because some other people were talking infinity in space. And now we're just talking infinity in, like, small spaces. So, not big space, but, like, infinite, you know, there's infinitely divisible lines. I can always chop a line up into halves. So, yeah. Welcome in, Kali. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it. Yeah, and because I want to just, like, pump my own stuff, like, I just got a paper published, and I do, like, it relates to philosophy of language. Haha. So. Yeah, I was talking paradoxes. That's not really philosophy of language. The next one I have coming out, I hope, will be more philosophy of language, but, yeah, that one I actually, yeah, so. But as a fellow nerd, I get to brag a little bit. So, yeah. So, okie dokie. Yeah, where was I? Okay, yeah, so if you have like a whole bunch of like, you know, triangles on a grid, all the different sides, you can line them up. You're just looking at research proposals and you want to cry. Yeah. Yeah. Academia sucks. We've got a bunch of academics here in chat too. Or former academics and sometime academics sometimes. So it's like, yes, we know. We know. We commiserate. Yeah. So all we're doing, we're all idiots, Vipers. We are all idiots. I guess some can be generalized to all. A bunch of computer people too. Gunky space is a phrase I thought I'd never read. Yeah, this person is trying to be a little bit cute. Where is Gunky? Yeah, down here or something. Yeah, Gunky. Philosophers do try to amuse themselves. This person used variables earlier, which this does not happen by mistake. So it's P sub NS. So, you know, we have PNS. So this person's trying to be amusing, at least to themselves. Like, they know. Welcome to philosophy. Yeah. Where people are just petty and stupid, and this is like, people in philosophy do shit to get away with it sometimes. -5 points immediately. Kali. This person's like really impressive. This is like a named professor of philosophy. This is the Daniel Nolan is the McMahon Hank professor of philosophy at University of Notre Dame. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Viper says, in mereology, an area of metaphysical logic, philosophical logic, the term gunk applies to any whole whose parts have further proper parts. That is, a gunky object is not made of individual atoms or simples, because parthood is transitive. Any part of gunk is itself gunk. Yes. So, like, this is actually a technical term, but to be fair, the people who made this up at the time knew what they were doing. I have it on perhaps good authority that like certain terms were made up just to annoy other people. And it's like, yeah. So like there's gaps and gluts in philosophical logic too. Gluts was specifically made up to annoy one of the authors, just because they knew that person wouldn't like calling what they were talking about gluts. And it's like, okay. So it's like, yeah, it's petty shit. I mean, entertaining at times, but still kind of petty. Yeah. All right, so this author was doing some complicated little math, and it's like, all right. So, yeah, the okay. So they were making a little paradox out of this sort of thing. So let's see. Does any of this make sense? If we insist that the squares are adjacent only if they share a side, then the hypotenuse is 10 squares long. A model of space that treats 5√2 meters as being either 5 meters or 10 meters comes with serious cost. Yeah, so okay. So what we were talking about was if you have to fit things into like a certain spaces, because the universe is broken up into discrete parts, then all of a sudden when you have two like a right triangle, like I could actually just draw on this. Let me just. Wow. That was crazy. All right. Did not mean to do that. Yeah, so let's see. Can I do this? There we go. Better. So like, wow, I can't draw. I should have known this. Terrible. Okay. So this is a right triangle. So imagine that's a right triangle, and this is length side 1, this one's like side 1, and that makes this one √2. Yeah, thank you. Now, if that's this, okay, and so like, now imagine, actually, oh, you know what? Imagine these are actually what they were saying. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm just like embarrassingly bad at this. Oh, what did I just do? Oh, because my hand is fucking this up. 5. I haven't had an opportunity to draw like this in forever, so I have not practiced. Okay, so now you get this idea. Better there. But when the Justin Bieber hand is not even a heart, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, so you don't think, oh yeah, Zeno might not have, he probably thought everything was a continuum. This is a newer idea, Atom Fighter, but that's correct. So yeah, he was trying to destroy the atomist house of thought. See, that's interesting because, you know, that's one of the things that this is doing. If you think that, like, there are discrete parts of the universe, you cannot account for this 5√2 because 5√2 does not fit into what, like, it's in between 5 and 10. And if you can't be like at a, you know, at a ratio between 5 and 10, it doesn't make sense. And that's what the author is saying here, that if it's like between 5 and 10, but you can only be at 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 or 10, but not at some, like, you know, 5.832, then you're saying that the triangle here is, the hypotenuse is not that size, and that makes no sense in terms of triangles. Okay, have a great night, Kali. Thank you for stopping by. Appreciate it. So, but yeah, talking weird things. So there's so this is granular space, and that's what we're talking about here. Like, can you actually granulize space? And if you even attempt to do it, it's very weird. When I was thinking about this, I had a relativized granular space. I should go check out this forest thing, because if you relativize granular space, then it would be like, say, relative to the thing that you couldn't granulize. And then you could, like, you know, granulize on the 5√2 and then to the 5s. But maybe. Yeah. But who knows? I'd have to look that up. All right. So, continuing. We're almost at the end anyway. Like, we've got, you know, a few pages. Got to get to page 10, and we're on, like, the end of page 6 or something. So, what if space has smaller and smaller regions in it, but it never grounds out in components of zero size? Take your time, you're hooked. Hey, well, this is why we read this one. It was discussing what I think Ivan Neo was talking about earlier in his stream, and yeah. So, what if space has smaller and smaller components of smaller regions in it, but it never grounds out in components of zero size or parts without size at all. If you prefer to to treat points as lacking volume altogether. This picture of space is often called gunky, connected to gunk, the technical term for an object such that all of its proper parts have proper parts. That is, parts other than themselves. Yeah, so if like humans have proper parts because, like, say humans have hearts and like livers and stuff like that. So we have proper parts. The paradox of plurality as presented is blocked at the beginning. There are no smallest parts of space on this view because every part always has a part. So yeah. I mean, granular space would need a different geometry, problem solved, right? Yeah, but that's exactly what this thing with the triangles is meant to show. It's that, like, all of a sudden you get really weird things because you couldn't actually have a real triangle because of, like, things that are not like, you'd be redefining the world, you'd be redefining the universe according to your geometry. You can do that, but then what justification you have? You're saying, well, the world is according to my theory. That doesn't, like, yes, but, like, you've just detached yourself from physical reality too. So yeah, you can define yourself out of the problem, but most people do not allow you to just define yourself out of the problem and be like, hey, yeah, what I say is right, so you should just all take my theory without actually having any evidence for it. So it's like, yeah, problem solved, right? Yes, but no one's going to believe you unless you have evidence, and no one's going to do it. So we'd have to look at who this this Forrest 1995 is to see more plausible options of discrete space. Okay. So yeah, if all the things you always have smaller parts in them, then there is no smallest part. The gunky view of space can allow that space has infinitely many parts of more than zero size, but they only add up to a finite amount because there are not infinitely many non-overlapping parts of the same finite size. In 1 meter of space, you can find 10 non-overlapping parts of 10 centimeters, or 100 of 1 centimeter, or 1,000 of 0.1 centimeter, but when you add up non-overlapping parts of the same size, you never get more than 1 meter. Since there are infinitely many parts, the gunk theorist has to agree that the arrow passes through an infinite sequence of distances before it hits its target, and that Achilles must run through infinitely many distances to catch the tortoise. The gunk theorist is a friend of infinity. Gunky space has been less discussed than its main rivals, but one worry about it is discussed under infinite regress arguments below. Another option is to say that the infinite divisibility of space is only a potential infinity. Insisting that infinities in the world are only potential is a tradition that goes back to Aristotle. Yeah, Aristotle made up the word, like, potential and, like, actual. Like, he may have made up the word potential. I'm not, or used it first time in philosophy. I'm not sure other people had potentials in philosophy until Aristotle. Trying to remember, like, what Plato said about potentialities, but I don't know. Yeah, Aristotle was the one that made it popular. And it's safe to say that this was the dominant tradition in the West until the 20th century. A potential infinity could mean one of two things. The first is that there is, in fact, only a finitude, but it is just that this finite collection could be increased or could be extended. For example, one way of counting numbers to be potentially infinite in this way would be if only finite many of them exist, but we can always extend the collection of counting numbers by adding 1. Another way, less connected to us and our adding activities, would be to think that there were only as many numbers as objects, but the highest number could have been larger without finite limit if extra objects had existed. Okay, so that means we're only actually adding numbers up to whatever we've ever actually added numbers up to, and they didn't exist until we added that. We actually, used that really big number. That's interesting too. But, like, yeah, why would... It seems a little less likely given how people, less, going to be less popular because people don't think of math in that way. It's just when we add numbers up, that's when they are created. People like to think that, the numbers could just be there. Okay, the other way to think about potential infinities is to think that there is indeed an infinite collection, regions of space, counting numbers, etc., but that many members of that collection only have potential existence. They are not yet actualized. For example, an Aristotelian might think that a point only has actual existence when it is a boundary of a real thing, for example, when it is at the tip of the arrow. Those points at places where boundaries could be but are not at the moment could be considered potential existence. This version of potential infinities is not very popular today since most philosophers dislike drawing this sort of distinction between kinds and existences. Adam says, the property of discrete means finite and continuous means infinite. Basically for this discussion that would be fine. Yeah, because continuous means even if the continuum was like, of only a certain length, like, this much, you could still break that continuum up into infinitely many pieces because there's always, you could divide it in half. Finite would mean like, there's only 10 blocks of space between my hands right here and there's 10 of them. Yeah, infinitely divisible. That's what continuous would be here. Okay, insisting that the divisibility of time or space is only potentially infinite is often offered as a solution to Zeno's challenges. It deals with the paradox of plurality. If space is not made up of any merely potential parts, either because there aren't any potential parts on the first view, or they lack actual existence needed to make up actual space on the second, then the question of how small these bits can make up something finite does not arise. How potential infinities are supposed to address the paradox of the arrow is less clear. I'm happy you're happy. Adam, thank you for being here. Aristotle seemed to deny that the halfway points the arrow had to pass through had actual existence, but completing an infinite series of passing through points with potential existence seems just as problematic. And if we interpret the claim that halfway points have only potential existence as the claim that there are no halfway points at all, though there could be, we have to answer awkward questions about why the arrow does not ever get halfway to its target, since there's no halfway for it to get to. Saying infinities are only potential still leaves plenty of problems to deal with. One interesting philosophical issue, which of the alternatives correctly describes space and time, or spatial and temporal things, One interesting philosophical issue is which of the alternatives correctly describes space and time, or spatial and temporal things. But another interesting issue is which of these alternatives are coherent. If only one of these alternatives is coherent, for example, some finitists have suggested that only the granular view is possible, then surprisingly we can tell without having to investigate the world some important information about the ultimate structure of space and time. Or at least the only investigation we need to do is to notice that some things move and other elementary observations of our everyday world. To decide whether there is a scientific question about whether the world contains continuous space, for example, we need to be as clear as we can about what the alternatives would amount to. Yeah, so if we just say, look, who cares about motion? Who cares about space and time? Can we even consider changes in space and time? Can we even consider a space that is not continuous or not granular? Maybe then we don't have to go investigating the way things move because we just can't think of the world otherwise. And then we just have to figure out how to describe reality once we realize we can't do it the way the world must be, at a metaphysical level. So now we're getting to infinite regresses in metaphysics. Infinities are often discussed when infinite regress arguments are deployed to try to prove metaphysical conclusions. Perhaps the most famous infinite regress arguments are arguments for the existence of a first cause, arguments often employed in an attempt to prove the existence of God. It is doubtful that a proof that there is a first cause would help very much in making the case for the existence of God. Why suppose a first cause would be intelligent or powerful or beneficent, or have any other attributes commonly attributed to deities? But leaving aside theological concerns, the question of whether there is a first cause is interesting in its own right, and it would be surprising if armchair reflections about causation could establish that much about the origin of the universe. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of versions of cosmological arguments. Yeah, being stupid never stopped us before. Go right, we do it anyway. A simple form of the regress arguments might go like this. 1. Every natural thing has a cause. 2. The chain of causes cannot go back infinitely. 3. There can be no causal loops. 4. Therefore, every chain of causation must have a first cause at its beginning. Alright, so end argument. Presumably, this first cause must be something that does not fall under the generalization at 1. God is often offered as a candidate first cause that does not itself need a cause. Both premises 1 and 3 can be disputed, of course. Premise 1 is probably disputed more than premise 3. The idea that the Big Bang, or for that matter, random quantum fluctuations, could just happen in an uncaused way remains a popular view. Yeah, so keep that in mind, that we allow for things that have no causes in quantum physics. So we have already given up causality in certain cases. Yeah. I actually make use of this in the paper that just got published. The author criticized me for saying, well, you're talking about like things that like are uncaused or like that have weird probabilities. And I said, yeah, we've already given that up. This was something the reviewer criticized me for, and I had to go back and say that, yeah, this is I literally had to go say this to the reviewer right here, like this thing. So you can see that at the end of the paper if you look at the one I just published. Yeah. Frank says, what if the thing is caused by something outside my future light cone? Well, that in terms of physics might be a problem explaining what it was, but in terms of metaphysics, in terms of philosophy, it's not, because it's just caused and it's like anything else. Okay, you've already got that twisted. I was gonna say, yeah, like if it's outside your light cone and you don't know, then we'll never know. But in terms of the metaphysics, it was still like anything else. It had a cause. So it's like, okay. The problem is when there's like causal loops, like did it self-cause itself or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, so, but it is a good point. Quantum fluctuations, like what causes a radioactive decay? By definition, basically, we have no good answer for that. We know the rate at which it decays. We don't know why any why any decay happens at that particular point. Yeah, I know. But, people are making me drown. I think I put a 5-minute on it. And so, I mean, one drink every 5 minutes is not terrible. Maybe I should drop it to 3 or something. I don't remember what I did. Oh, I only did it once. Check again on the next stream. Okay, I fucked that up. I thought I put a 5-minute on it, and I only put one drink on there. Okay, so I did that wrong. I'm sorry, Vipers. I've not really worked on the channel point rewards very much, and so I don't know about them. I was like, hey, I can go in there and change it, and I did. I was changing the get rid of a word, cross out a word or whatever. So I was trying to get rid of that one, so I couldn't have people just like telling me I couldn't use like half my vocabulary. Anyway, okay. For our purposes, though, the most interesting premise is 2 being the chain of causes cannot go back infinitely. Why not think that there is a succession of cause and effect stretching back into the past without end? Of course, we might have specific evidence from cosmology that the world had a beginning, for example, the Big Bang, but is there any principled philosophical reason to reject an infinite regress of cause and effect? 2 have been traditionally offered. One is the belief that there cannot be an actual infinity, but only a potential infinity, as Aristotle claimed above. If the past is actual and we had an infinite regress of causes, we would have an infinite series of actual causes and effects already in existence. Those who claim actual infinities are incoherent will reject an actual infinity of past causes. Of course, this reasoning is only good as is that which supports rejecting actual infinities. Interestingly, Aristotle himself, despite his rejection of actual infinities, did not object to an infinity of past causes. Aristotle seems to have thought that the word that past was not actual anymore in the relevant sense, only the present was. Yeah, so this just got ourselves into philosophy of time. If you don't think that time in the past is real, then maybe you can have an infinitely non-real history because the history doesn't exist, only the present does, which is weird in terms of our like contemporary understanding, but maybe there's something to that. Like, we're just telling ourselves a story about the past. It doesn't have actuality. And so since we're just telling ourselves a happy story about the past that like came before us, it doesn't matter if it has infinitely many parts because it's not real. It's just some sort of story we're making up. That's a very weird thing, but, maybe that is an option. The second reason to reject an infinite regress of cause and effect is that there is something incoherent in this infinite chain of dependence. The intuition that the buck must stop somewhere is hard to argue for. A defender of the claim could suggest that when we explain an effect by reference to its cause, for example, that explanation is somehow incomplete unless we explain the cause's occurrence as well. And if that in turn is explained by reference to a further cause, a further explanation is called for, and somehow there is something unsatisfactory unless that sequence comes to an end. This is fair, because you could say, well, why did you stop at this point? It seems cherry picking to say, well, this is the cause if that thing also had a cause. Why is that the relevant stopping point? You have to explain that, why you picked that spot over some other one. Author says, of course, it is hard to see how such a sequence could end if we do insist that each cause is an unsatisfactory explanation until itself is explained. Any first cause will have this problem, and postulating a god as a first cause will not make the problem go away. Indeed, the challenge of trying to explain a god or that god's existence can seem even more intractable than explaining the Big Bang. Yeah, this is the thing, Unreal Brian, a 3-year-old always asking why. Wittgenstein famously claimed that, inquiry has to stop, or questioning has to stop somewhere. And it's why at some points does it have to stop, and other times you can seemingly, well, what came before the Big Bang? What caused God to exist? Why do you think those questions make sense? But when you say, well, 1 + 1 is 2, and then someone says why, well, it just is, and there's not a whole lot more to be said. Of course, you could get all into the philosophy of mathematics, but somehow it seems like certain questions, philosophers and 3-year-olds, yes. But why do we stop? Under what circumstances is it acceptable to stop asking questions? And maybe we have, this was a Wittgensteinian point, maybe we have misjudged these sorts of big metaphysical questions about what came first, before the Big Bang, what caused God. Maybe that's also sort of a confusion of language. And it's well, we know the answers, and asking anything beyond that doesn't really make sense, whatever answers we have. So, theists interested in using this sort of argument usually have some special pleading about how God is his own cause or explanation in the way that ordinary events and things do not, or that God is a necessary being and necessary beings do not need a further cause or explanation. Yeah, this is back to Aristotle's unmoved mover, or self-caused cause, or whatever you want to say. So other metaphysical infinite regress arguments also rely on the idea that chains of dependence must ground out somewhere. Again, most people think that if you're going to give an explanation, you're going to give the relevant explanation, and so it must ground out somewhere. If you keep asking why, in some sense, you're losing information at a certain point. Get out of jail free. Yeah, a lot of this is hand waving, Ivan. It's okay, yeah, it's we're going to wave our hand now and say this is the end of the line, and we just don't have to explain anymore. And that's fair. It's at a certain point you wave your hand and say, that's all I can do. And is that sufficient? Maybe not. Okay, some people think that wholes depend on their parts. Once you have the parts and the relation between them, nothing more is needed for the whole, whether we are talking about heaps of sand, tables and chairs, or human bodies. Some of them are tempted by a regress argument against the view that there is gunk. Yeah, so things that have proper parts, but they're all one thing. If an object or region of space or duration of time is made up of parts, and they are made up of parts, and so on forever, then the whole structure will not ground out in ultimate parts that themselves have no proper parts. Objects without proper parts are often called simples or atoms, though this use of atom is to be distinguished from the word's use in chemistry. It should be clear, however, how the infinite regress argument would go. If there is gunk, then the parts of the objects have proper parts, and they have proper parts, and so on ad infinitum, without ever reaching a level of ultimate parts. But this chain of dependence must ground out, it cannot go on forever, therefore there is no gunk. Here, it is not infinity per se that is the problem. Many of those who think gunk is impossible do believe in the possibility of an object made up of infinitely many simples and so infinitely divisible in at least one good sense. It is rather the never-ending chain of parthood that is supposed to be the problem. Yeah, exactly, Unreal Brian. This is the problem with philosophers. They ruin really fun words. Like, never get into the philosophical zombie discussion. You will just get depressed and never want to hear about zombies ever again, which will ruin a lot of media for you. It's really depressing. The philosophical zombie sucks. Just does. Okay, others will want to deny that there is dependence of a whole on its parts. For example, one might think that the whole and its parts are equally well-existing objects, and while they stand in a particular intimate relationship, it does not follow that either is dependent on the other. Others may even want to think that parts sometimes or always depend on their wholes and not vice versa. Those who think dependence runs both ways will at least believe that the sort of dependence necessary for the above argument. Yeah, so this is the thing. If you think this is a human hand, then is it dependent on being part of a human, which makes it a human hand? And so maybe it's the holes that are actually defining the parts, not the parts that define the holes. And so this is Vipers. It's actually very simple because philosophy is depressing, and you've known this since you've been in philosophy roulette. A lot of it's just really lame arguments. And if you keep reading about them, you talk about qualia a lot and other really annoying topics. That's very simply it. It gets into some very, very annoying topics. So that's all. Like topics I don't want to go into. Okay. So still others may be happy to concede that wholes depend on their parts, but be happy with infinite chains of dependence that do not ground out in partless parts that do not depend in this way on anything else. In the first cause case, many are happy with the idea that there could be never-ending chains of causal dependence that do not stop with an uncaused cause. In the gunk case, many are happy with chains of part-whole dependence that do not ground out in partless parts, that is, parts with no proper parts. Getting beyond this unease to a consideration that will convince their opponents, on the other hand, is a goal that has remained elusive. Yeah, so I mean, if you got people on one hand that say, hey, it's okay to have infinities, and on the other hand say, no, there are no infinities, and you just have to, like, live with, like, having a weird, like, first part, it's an impasse. This has been going on since Aristotle, if not before. Like, there's not going to be an agreement until for a long time. Yeah, please don't. Like, that just is like, it needs to be taken out back, shot, and anyone who wants to, like, talk about justified true belief, get the fuck out. Just go. I don't want to hear it. And, like, you're a bad philosopher and you should feel bad. Okay. Other topics. Yeah, so this is, last page. Other topics. There are a number of other places in metaphysics where infinities play an important role, though there will be space to do little more than mention these topics. Readers who find these tastes particularly interesting can follow up in the further references given. In no particular order, other philosophical issues involving infinity include: are there infinitesimal magnitudes? An infinitesimal is less than any positive real number, but greater than zero. Consistent mathematical models of infinitesimals have been developed, but they are not part of classical mathematics. If infinitesimals have application in the real world, for example, if there are infinitesimal distances or masses or objective chances, what impact does that have on standard theories of space-time or chance? Some philosophers want to defend strict finitism, the view that there are not and could not be infinitely many objects. Strict finitists sometimes want to argue that there is something wrong with the concept of infinity, others just that it is unnecessary. One interesting question pursued by strict finitists is how much of our ordinary mathematical practice can be recaptured if there are only finitely many numbers or mathematical sets. There are issues about infinities and abstract objects. How many possible worlds and possibilities are there? How many propositions are there? Presumably, there are at least infinitely many of each if they exist at all. But coming up with principles about the cardinality of these things is not straightforward. Oh, thank you, Aristotle. JTB could get the fuck out. That's exactly right. I did not see that, but you're getting a shout out because of it. Aris. So, if I had the fortitude to learn math in my dotage, I'd learn about infinitesimal. Those sound cool. You know, a lot of this stuff is cool. Like, if you like this stuff, like, go look it up. It is fun. Like, if you are, like, mathematically inclined. But like I said, you should avoid JTB, and, yeah. That's all. That's just my, 2 cents on that. Never JTB. Or you can mention JTB as something that you disagree with, or as something that other people say. That's fine. Other people are dumb. Yeah, geometrically inclined. Exactly, Ivan. Okay. Okay, infinities come in different sizes. What is the largest size like, if there is one? If there is not one, why does everything altogether not get a size? Georg Cantor, who first proved that there are infinities of different sizes, believed that there was a greatest infinity, the absolute infinite, which was not entirely understandable by us. Some contemporary class theorists believe that there are proper classes, collections too big to be sets. If proper classes are all of the same size, this would be the largest size. Is God infinite? If so, in what sense? In some relatively mundane sense, for example, being located at infinitely many locations in space and time, or being able to employ forces of infinite magnitude, or to do infinitely many different kinds of things, or in a special sense, or in both. If God is infinite in some distinctive sense, how is that sense related to other mathematical and physical senses of infinity discussed here? Okie doke. Is it an STD? JTB is justified true belief. It's a theory of knowledge that knowledge is equivalent to justified true belief. Aristotle proposes that we replace God with your mom. Your mom is an unmoved mover. If your mom is infinitely fat, then, yeah. Then her fat, is so large that you exist within her fat in some place. I mean, because it has infinite fat, so it will have, universes within it. She has her own gravitational pull. She is gravity at that point. She defines what gravity is. Okay, this was kind of fun. I mean, you can see this is a textbook thing. This was running through a lot of stuff without, doing, this was describing a lot of things. It wasn't actually, arguing for any one point. DCI, have a great night. You want to get around, get your review in. So anyone who wants, you're saying good night to Unreal Brian. Unreal Brian, not night to DCI. Unreal Brian, if you want to get your review in now. This is what we do at the end of every paper. We review it. So what you do is you copy the emote thing, and you can say, did this have fun ideas, make your brain dance? I think this one was, this was more popular piece. It was for a bit more general audience. This wasn't really getting into the nitty gritty of any one argument. Your mom is so fat she violates the Pauli exclusion principle. Damn. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So we got thank you Unreal. You got a vote yay. You can always use the global emotes. Vote yay and vote nay, and say if you liked it or not. Brain dance. Did this make big claims that shrivel up? You can write grapes. This didn't feel like that to me. Was it only navel gazing, only for academics? That's not navel. Again, this seemed more public. Ouroboros. Maybe you want to give this an Ouroboros. I don't know. Was this deep ancient mysteries? Because we were talking about Zeno's paradoxes, things that have been around in millennia. Maybe you do want to give it an Ouroboros. I'm not claiming that. But again, this was a light treatment. We didn't get into a whole lot of depth here. So yeah, Vipers is giving it a little navel gazing, fun, but it also deep. So that's a mixed bag on this. Fair. Very fair. DCI says, your mom is so fat and old when God said, let there be light, she has moved out of the way. Yeah, exactly. The Scream, this is, I wouldn't say anything existential happened here. There's no artistic, aesthetic, things. Golden Turd, was this all style, no substance? Like last, paper we read, which was really depressing, that last one. That was literally the second worst paper, the second most hated paper. I don't know about worst, but second most hated paper I've ever read on Philosophy Roulette. And then knife, slice and dice. Like the thing. So yeah. You missed the G there, Ivan. Mrs. Banks makes a proper scone though. Oh, okay. Yeah, so what am I going to say? I think this gets a brain dance. This was a little bit of fun. What else are we going to give this? Yeah. She's a celiac? Okay. Rip. Yeah. It's funny. Yeah, let's give it a dance. Let's give it a vote yay. Vote yay. Why are these really deep ancient mysteries? I don't know. This because it was kind of a light treatment. I don't know if this is actually deep ancient mysteries talking about motion and stuff. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm being unfair. Your mom is so fat she brought a spoon to the Super Bowl. Oh man. Wow. She was like, I'm going to eat all that.